All right, welcome to SoH Debates on Air, where we talk about different types of issues. And today we're going to be talking about America's impact on the world and domestically. So today we have Skinner and Juice Orbis.
Hey guys.
Orbis, right? And Skinner is I don't know how to. Skinner, just wave if you, or say hi.
Here. I'm here.
Okay, so that's Skinner, and Blaine is, Juice Orbis is the one right there. And over there you have Drewski.
Wow, I forgot my name. So basically, the show will be a debate show, and at the beginning of each show there will be a motion, and today's motion is historically the foreign and domestic policy of the U.S. has had an overall positive impact on society. Arguing for the motion will be Ryan Skinner, and arguing against the motion will be Blaine Deuce Orbis on show of hands. And basically the format is going to be each person's going to have a 3-minute opening statement, a 3-minute rebuttal, and then we'll have like 15 minutes, maybe over. There's no like strict time constraint where they can just go at it. They can ask each other's questions. They can talk freely amongst each other. And also we're going to throw in a few questions of our own. But keep in mind, Irony and I are only moderators, so we will not be debating anybody. I know Skinner is a lone wolf amongst a bunch of commies right now, but like, do not worry, we're not gonna attack him. All right.
Yeah.
So, arguing for the motion is awkward. Ryan Skinner.
And go ahead and tell them the motion.
Oh, historically, the U.S. Is foreign and domestic policy has had an overall positive impact on society. And starting us off will be Ryan Skinner with his opening statement supporting the motion.
Should I proceed now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the United States is a nation state like any other, and as such, we're not perfect. From time to time, we do make selfish actions in our own interest, while ignoring the greater global interest. And I'm sure Blaine will point that out from time to time. However, on balance, we have managed to maintain our strategic interests while also sustaining our fundamental values. Values like democracy and civil liberties. We have the longest written constitution in the world. We have the longest one that's been sustained throughout history. We're an anti-hierarchy state. Over in Europe, there was feudal peoples living under the strain of landlords who controlled their every movement. In America, people finally had a chance to have their own land, their own rules, and that was really, truly unique in that time. And really independence despite wild adversity. Like, talk about going deep into the West, not knowing what's going to be out there, just hoping that you can stake yourself a claim and improve your life for your children. And that's kind of the American dream. And as a result, immigrants came here. They prevailed despite prejudice. Like, look, Jews were persecuted throughout Europe. In America, they're the richest demographic for religions. And Asians, they were excluded for a long time in our immigration policy. And now they're the richest ethnic group. Indians specifically are the richest ethnic group. So why did they come here? The U.S. is a refuge, a place where the streets were fabled to be made of gold, where your potential is limited only by your drive to succeed. Today, immigrants start 30% of the companies in Silicon Valley. And that's just part of what the U.S. does, because we've been instrumental not only in protecting economic interests and the interests of immigrants and people around the world, but we've sustained democracy, we've promoted democracy, and we've inspired democracy across the world. And as a result, we've placed nations under protection, nations like Japan, Taiwan, France, Germany. And you can say what you want about that. You can say we're occupying them or whatever. But in the end, what we're doing is we are providing protection, which stops them from militarizing and helps stop another great European war from occurring. Because what happened after World War I was nations armed again, and you can see what we had there. The United States, as the world superpower, has managed to prevent that and to keep the peace. And that's been truly great for the people around the world. And I think that's one of the great reasons that America has been a net force for good. That's all I have to say for now.
So do Sorbis or Blaine, could you go ahead and give your opening statement?
Sure. The U.S. has had an overall negative effect on the world. You can look at this in our domestic policy, or you can look at it in our foreign policy. Domestically, we have oppressed people. We segregated. We banned drugs at the risks of others. For instance, the drug war, we've locked up 336,000 of our own Americans domestically for nonviolent drug-related crimes out of the 2.2 million Americans who are incarcerated. Because of this, it fuels the drug cartels in South America. The top 5 most dangerous countries are all South American countries involved in drug cartel. They have the highest homicide rates. If we change that policy, that would simply change as well. That would be a great thing for the world. Domestically, we militarize our police. 80% of SWAT are sent for search warrants, for fuck's sake. About 1,100 people are killed by the police each year. It's really not that much of a safe haven in the U.S. anymore. Overall, if you were to look at our foreign policy, you would see that that we set up dictatorships. We actually oppose democracy. We in Iran, when the elected leader, Prime Minister Mossadegh, was elected in 1951. We killed him in 1953 and replaced him with a puppet leader. And then that's what caused Iran to become the way it is now. We don't have a good involvement in the war, or in the world. Vietnam, we mercilessly bombed and indiscriminately killed so many people. In one day, in the December raids, the Christmas bombings, we killed nearly 2,000 civilians. I mean, that's not a good thing. To say that we have a positive effect in the world is to ignore all of these negative consequences that we do. And that is my closing statement.
Opening statement.
Opening statement. What are those two things?
Same thing.
All right. Skinner,
So
would
Ryan,
you like to rebuttal?
Yeah.
Yeah, give a rebuttal.
Yeah, if I may. First of all, I'd like to address your point about the drug policy of the United States. It's true the United States bans many drugs, all those hard drugs like heroin and meth, methamphetamine, and even lighter drugs like marijuana. However, if you look across the world and see world drug laws, you'll find the United States is actually very progressive on that end. Very few countries have gone to the extent we have as far as legalization of marijuana. In fact, it's gone to the point where the United Nations has been saying that we're in violation of some agreements that we put together about drug laws. Because many states around the country have legalized the use of drugs, like marijuana and what have you. So to say that the United States does have a problem with drug addiction, I will admit that. But we're working to fix that, and that's part of the great American experiment. As far as U.S. dictators go, yes, there have been incidents where, as I said, the United States interests win over values. But I would argue those are in the minority. For example, let's look at some recent events. The Arab Spring. Mubarak was a U.S.-backed dictator for a long time, and we have a lot of investment in him. He was very important to U.S. policy. We funded his military, his government, to protect Israel and our interests in the region. And President Obama pulled the plug on him. In the midst of the revolution, he, at a decisive moment, he decided that he wasn't going to back Mubarak anymore, and he was going to allow for the rebels to, or the protesters rather, to continue their protests and seek regime change. And that was a critical move because loyalists in the military, we have a lot of influence in Egyptian military, obviously. And so I think that was a big reason why they fell. And in fact, many Egyptians now accuse us of supporting Muslim Brotherhood. And I don't know why we would do that. I mean, they're linked to Hamas and other terrorist organizations. We really have no interest in a group like the Muslim Brotherhood. And look at Libya. Gaddafi, we took him down. Never liked him from the start, given that's because he's against our interests. But again, interests and values can coincide. And so we bombed Gaddafi, and as a result, they captured him and they killed him. And now Libya is on a path, a dangerous path to give them, but they're on a path to democracy. And it's not easy, but they're on their way. Tunisia is a much better example of a stable democracy that we backed. You said that the dictator there, one of the first to go in the Arab Spring, you said that reform is needed, and as a result, he's left the country, and now we have recently elected a president there who will look out for the Tunisian people, we hope. So the United States had a lot of indirect influence too. I mean, if you, there was a quote I have somewhere in my notes. Here it is. So from 1987, the Time magazine reports that of the 170 countries that existed at the time, more than 160 at that time had written charters modeled directly or indirectly on the U.S. version. So even when we're not asserting democracy on our own, the indirect influence from what we're doing has been proceed for us to other countries and other peoples who look to the United States for guidance. That's all I have to say for now.
All right.
You mentioned the U.S. drug policy not being that different, if anything, being lenient when compared to other countries. That's simply not the case. 360,000 are in prison. I don't think you see any other country incarcerating that many people for having drugs. The exceptions would be countries that kill people for having drugs, but those are very few. You never addressed the Vietnam War, which was probably one of the worst wars we've ever done. We indiscriminately killed northern Vietnamese and Cambodians and performed many illegal actions such as bombing them, Cambodia, which we never declared war on. That's not something that countries that have a positive influence on the world do. Additionally, you used the freedom that Tunisia had received, well, fought for in the Arab Spring. That country backs ISIS, so that isn't exactly positive if we were to say that we had an influence on that. So I can't really, we wouldn't want to take credit for the Arab Spring in Tunisia.
It looks like Skinner wants to respond to that, so let's go ahead and let him respond.
Okay.
I'm unaware of Tunisia actively supporting ISIS. I'm not sure quite where you heard that from. I know there's a lot of misconceptions about who supports ISIS because we do have a lot of Middle Eastern states who support radical Islam. You can look at states like Qatar. But I'm unaware of anything Tunisia has done to that end. And especially since the recent ISIS push in earlier last year, we've seen a lot of countries cut off any support they have for radical jihadist groups assimilated with ISIS. So maybe that's something they did before. I honestly don't know. And as for Vietnam, yeah, I would say Vietnam was a mistake. But as I said, nations make mistakes. Not every war is just. And the fact that the North Vietnamese weren't very progressive either for their end. Look at what they did once they conquered South Korea. And I think what you do is not that I'm ignoring what was gone wrong, because I've said many times that we have done things wrong, and that's a fact. But we've done so many things right that go unappreciated. Like, let's look at the 2014 World Giving Index. They announced that the United States and Myanmar were the most giving nations in the world. We donate the most to charity. We volunteer the most time. We help the most strangers. And really, as far as wars go, like the Vietnam War, we've seen a large decline in major wars between major powers since the Pax Americana began. The U.S. really, I think, has had a pretty big role since the Cold War and before the Cold War, since World War II really, in preserving that peace. Whether it's the United States and the Soviet Union checking one another, or in the post-Soviet era, the United States trying to preserve stability, I think it's resulted in a lot less conflict, and a lot less large-scale conflict.
All right. So I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit. I'd like to direct a question to Skinner. How can you justify subjugating people for hundreds of years through the process of slavery? How can that possibly be considered an overall net good that came out of America?
I'm not going to try to justify slavery. It was obviously an awful institution and something that never should have been done. However, we need to look at this from a historical perspective. This was during an era where a lot of countries were abolishing slavery. Let's say the United States never was created. Let's say the revolution never happened and we continue to be ruled by Great Britain. But what happened was, and I believe it was 1833, the UK abolished slavery. However, they instituted extensions for certain colonies which required slavery in certain industries. And as a result, slavery wasn't really abolished in many territories until 1843. And the Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was in 1863. So, yeah, I guess if the United States was never created, we'd have 20 years left of slavery. But the question is that worth it? Because, really, considering all the other good things we've done, is 20 years of slavery really worth that much? And look, it is during an era where a lot of countries were abolishing slavery. A lot of countries before us, like just before us was Russia. And after us, we had Portugal, Brazil, the Ottomans, Cuba, Korea, Ethiopia, China, Siam, Nepal, all these nations. I could go on and on. And so we're not alone in this. And slavery was a pestilence which plagued all of mankind, really. But I think it's inspiring how we managed to right the wrongs, and our civil rights movement is testament to American fortitude and our devotion to securing whatever civil liberties we lack.
All right, Blaine, would you like to respond?
I don't think I can respond. I think that he did a pretty good response for that. I mean, you can't really, you can't, he obviously said that you can't justify slavery, but if you're putting it in a historical context, there still really isn't much of an excuse for the civil rights movement and struggles that African Americans and other minority groups had to go through in the U.S., which they didn't have the same struggle in the U.K., where they had a less violent struggle, rather.
But the UK also has a lesser African American or African English population, so I'm not sure it's comparable.
Yes, but that would make it easier for them to discriminate against them if they have a smaller population. I mean, reasonably, it's usually the smaller population that's going to get bullied by the larger one. So if you have a smaller percentage of African Americans, it would be easier to bully them, and they didn't do that. We went through hundreds of years, well, 100 years of lynching.
Or perhaps they go neglected.
Yeah.
Perhaps racist tendencies continue, but the government doesn't really even notice them because they're such a small part of the population. Like African American and race-related issues were big issues throughout American history. You don't see nearly as much of that in English history because I'm sure England wasn't really a egalitarian paradise in the 1830s either. Once slavery was abolished, there was still struggles in England, and they didn't have equality, not immediately. It's a process. They still had to go through it. This was much less acute because it's a much smaller part of the population.
Skinner, I have a question. Do you think that the fact that the U.S. was more advanced for its time, like industrially and scientifically, in many respects, not in all, during the period of slavery and afterwards, do you think that should have made it more, should have made social progress more easy to come, despite like what Blaine's saying, where it was a lot easier in other countries like the UK and stuff like that? Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it did. I mean, I think that in industrial countries, you're far less likely to have the need for slavery. Slavery was primarily used in rural countries, which is why there's a big difference between the rural South and the urban North, where there's mainly agriculture in the South and mainly industry in the North. So it makes sense that the Northerners who were changed to industry wouldn't want Southerners to have slaves, which could really impede their markets. And really there's a lot of economic arguments against slavery that were used by abolitionists, whether it's the fact that the yeomen were suffering under the yoke of having to compete with slaves who could work or would have to work or be forced to work by slave owners. They can't compete with that. They can't compete with labor that's free, although it's not quite free because Southerners had to weigh whether or not, which is really horrible really when you think about it, but they had to weigh whether or not the slaves are worth the investment. But besides for that, they have no cost besides feeding them and housing them. So I think there's a lot of economic arguments, and I think, as you said, yes, I think it did make a difference. But the United States was more economically advanced than other countries. And I think that we can see that other countries too, like England, for example. They were the first nation to industrialize, and as a result, they quickly abolished slavery. All
right, Blaine, I have a question for you. What what did so considering that the U.S. is one of the biggest world powers and it is the cause of such great advancements in technology and uh, just like the overall benefit of the world, like it's done so much for the world in terms of technology,
Mhm.
um, and like the people it breeds as well. Like there's just such a all of the most of the nation's universities are some of the top universities in the world. So in terms of in that sense, how can you say that uh, it's not breeding the top talent and it's not making a very positive impact on the world?
I'd say that if you look at it, we have a large amount of immigrants, and we are migrating people here to take the higher paying positions and the better positions because we aren't able to do them. We don't have the successful programmers. If you go to Silicon Valley, they are bringing in they're bringing in non-Americans because we can't do it anymore, despite having these amazing schools. Um, and maybe we aren't as amazing as we think we are if we aren't able to keep our own jobs.
Yeah, go ahead, Skinner.
But is it not amazing that we have an immigrant community, if that's true, that these skilled immigrants want to come to America, they want to live here, despite the other countries where, as you say, they may be more skilled? And I reject the notion that we are not skilled. We've had some of the greatest technological advancements. In the past, think of the steamboat, telegraph, airplane, light bulb, putting men on the moon. I mean, really. And recently, even the internet, the personal computer. I mean, really, we're sitting here on computers, personal computers invented in America, using electricity, which was revolutionized in America, and or on phones, which were popularized in America, talking about whether or not America has had a positive influence. We brought to the world 56 Nobel chemists, 87 Nobel Prize winners in medicine, 64 Nobel physicists, and 35 Nobel economists, altogether more than any other country in the world. And I have a lot more stuff I could drone on about, like, for example, we're responsible for over half the world's scientific and engineering articles, over 200,000. We contribute 353 billion out of a total 1.1 trillion for the world research and development investment. There's a lot of stuff here. So I'll let you continue.
Well, when you're looking at the Nobel Peace or the Nobel Prizes and all of those things, you have to keep in mind we have a much larger population than most other countries. When it comes to inventing or for electricity, more so discovering or harnessing it, that's like assuming that the U.S. was the only country that would have ever found these things or invented them. Other countries easily would have done it or could have done it. Germany, we might have been the first to create the atomic bombs, but Germany was pretty damn close as well. That's just showing how technologically advanced other countries can be, and even though we get there a second before, that doesn't mean that it never would have happened without us. It's honestly a little bit megalomaniacal to think that we're the hot shit, more or less.
Well, maybe other countries would have created at some point, but the facts are the United States created first. Our people created first. And how long can we wait? Look at diseases and what America's done for that. Polio killed 130,000 people and left many crippled for life. A lot of people were stuck in wheelchairs. Look at Roosevelt even. And Jonas Salk, an American, invented the first polio vaccine in 1957. Barely halfway, his vaccines saved tens of thousands of lives, we estimate. And if not over 100,000 people. And could we wait for that? Could we wait for the smallpox vaccine, which killed over 400 million? The United States established a smallpox unit in the World Health Organization, where we were the largest donor by far. And in 1977, the last major case of smallpox occurred, and so we saved what is estimated to be tens of millions of people through our investments, which helped create the smallpox vaccine. Measles killed 96.7 million people. American people like Thomas Peebles, John Enders, David Morley, they helped do a lot of research for this vaccine, which saved tens of millions of lives. Then there's tetanus, 37.1 million, and we were a big investor in that as well. So how long can we wait? How long can we wait for other countries to develop these vaccines and these technologies which advance mankind?
You're assuming that we aren't using research done in other countries as well to aid in the creation of these vaccines. For instance, I'm going to go back to the nuke again. Even though we created the nuke, you can say, oh, American scientists did it. Guess who's the one that did the research? Germans. Germans brought that research over. It wasn't American physicists who were doing the nuclear research at the time. It was Germans. We're a nation of immigrants, and that means that we have a lot of people coming here from other countries bringing their heritage along and their information. Their information has helped us over the years. Yeah.
So I would contend, again, that the fact that these Germans want to abandon their country and Third Reich, come to America and help us defeat the Nazis and the NSDAP and the horrible things they were doing to the Jews and other ethnicities is a really good sign that, as you said, we are a nation of immigrants. And I think that's a very good factor. I think that people choose America over the countries they were born in is a really good sign that maybe we're not so bad after all. So, yes, as you were saying, what was it? You were saying that, well, I forget what I was going to say. I apologize. But you were saying something about, go ahead. I'll remember it later.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, about the immigrants coming over. How did we welcome the immigrants? We typically discriminated against them. Certain parties favored immigration, others wanted to limit it, and we haven't been welcomed to immigrants. Albert Einstein, when he came to this country, he was told to go back to Germany. As a Jew, going back to Germany, we aren't exactly welcoming. So.
Oh, I agree. I mean, we've had a lot of things like, as you may have been noticing, I've been doing this thing with party platforms recently on Show of Hands, and I found out both parties, at least in their statements, opposed immigration, or a lot of it, from unproductive lands, which is really just a synonym for lands like Africa and Asia and South America. But what happened was these immigrants rose above it. Like I was saying earlier, Asians are the richest ethnicity, and immigrants rose above. And now they have a very good place in society. And now Bill O'Reilly can yell at other immigrants and tell them to go back, even though he's Irish. So, I mean, really America is a story of how these immigrants came here, and they overcame adversity and what a lot of people didn't like about them, and they became integral to the American spirit. I think there are more Irish people in America now than there is in Ireland, if I recall correctly. So I think to say that although we may have in the past some problems with immigrants, I think they've done a lot of good for us, and we've done a lot of good for them. And their children are better off now than they would be if they stayed in their home countries.
I wanted to ask Skinner what your to like address the Cold War, the not only like the many wars that were like but well, technically not wars if Congress didn't declare, but like you know what I mean, like the many military actions that we took during that period, and also the arms, like the arming and financial support to extremist like military or militaries and governments. For instance, in El Salvador, where we rearmed the right-wing extremist government in El Salvador, and they carried out multiple like the assassinations of like Archbishop Oscar Romero and the another thing, they would just go through villages slaughtering them. For instance, the massacre at El Mozote, 900 people were brutally slaughtered for communist beliefs, and another thing to address. I know it's kind of loaded by now, but like manifest destiny, what that means, like how America historically, do you think are I mean, you mentioned how we wanted to instill democracy in countries where it's lacking exactly that, and how could you address us trying to install not only democracy but our beliefs on what their government should be, on what their values should be? For instance, the Cold War addressing communism and such.
Well, what I would say is that, like I've been saying for a while now, sometimes the United States does support dictatorships, and sometimes they do horrible things. Like I think you were talking about the massacre over there in Latin America, and it's horrible. And perhaps I wouldn't be surprised if leftist organizations in that region and the insurgents use it for propaganda value. Maybe they exaggerate a little bit, but regardless, there were killings, and they are horrible, and they should be condemned. And not always they are. But nonetheless, oftentimes America has stood up for democracy. I mean, look what's going on. United States supporting protesters in China, United States supporting people all over the world. Everyone's looking to America and seeing what we have here and trying to recreate democracies in their own countries. And so yes, there have been mistakes. There have. And they're awful. They should never be repeated. But I want to get on to your point about manifest destiny before I take up too much time. So there's a lot of criticism about manifest destiny, the idea that we should go across with the country. And I imagine you're about to get into Native Americans, so I'll let you get into that before I rebut to that. But what's going on there is Americans, like I said, are trying to overcome adversity and seek their own place in the world. People from immigrants coming across the seas are coming to escape their feudal societies where they don't own any land. They're coming to America, getting a small plot in the dirt, farming, making a new life for themselves. And sometimes that didn't always work out peacefully, but oftentimes it did. And in those events, it works out well for everyone. Because you go west, I mean, it's empty. There's not a lot there. I mean, there were some tribes that migrated around, and they were mostly nomadic. And but a lot of those tribes, there's a bit of an idea that the United States practiced genocide against Native Americans, and perhaps that's true to an extent. However, you have to also recognize that most Native Americans died from diseases that we carry, and I guess that is our fault, but that's unintentional. That's not, we didn't intend for that to happen usually. Either way, it would have happened, whether America existed or not. Other countries would have pushed through America. And whether it's Mexico, whether it's Spain, whether it's England, what have you. So I think it's inevitable, but I think it's the world's benefit that America was a country to come across and take these lands and reform them into one of the greatest countries on earth.
All right, Blaine, do you have any final thoughts? posing?
Not really. Not. No.
Okay.
I had one more question.
Okay.
Sorry,
Alrighty.
I'm talking too much. And it was for Skinner. And but you bring up a lot of the positive things, which I agree on, most of them. And Blaine brings up negative things, and there's there's a lot of negative things in my mind that Blaine didn't mention. But again, I'm not the debater here. But I think that the motion specified an overall positive impact on society, and you mentioned, okay, yeah, we had this, but we also had good things too. Do you think that the good, like, I'm not hearing a lot of evidence for how the good things outweighed the bad things. Yes, we had immigration. Yes, we had Statue of Liberty, welcoming immigrants into our as a refuge into our land. And yes, Asians are the richest. An immigrant is the richest ethnicity in the United States. But does that negate the fact that historically? Does the fact that Asians are the richest ethnicity negate the fact that historically blacks and Hispanics are the poorest, and that historically blacks, not only slavery but the civil rights movement, even arguably today? I mean, I know, on show of hands, it's every day you see people disagreeing on the subject, but arguably today, oppression of minorities, and then we have, the DREAM Act. Started in 2001, was up for vote again in 2011, didn't pass by 5 votes, which sucked for the people who were rallying for it, but I digress. You have all these instances of, yes, immigrants came here, but did we treat them fairly enough to where the net impact on the immigrants was positive? And that's what I really want you to address, is how are you making a case for the net impact being positive, despite the positives that we do have?
Well, to be candid, there is no real way to prove that the United States has had an overall positive impact. I can only provide you with the facts I've contributed. I can only tell you what the United States has done right. My opponent can tell you what we've done wrong, and you can draw your own conclusions. There's no way to do it. It's all relative. I can tell you what America has done right, like America has contribute to the culture of the world. American culture is huge around the world. In fact, in many countries, they try to limit it because it's so pervasive. I can look at American books, Common Sense, The Great Gatsby, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Look at jazz, rock and roll, sports, like America institutionalized baseball, and we're exporting basketball around the world. And our primary education systems haven't taken heat. Our secondary education systems, like you said earlier, are remaining some of the best in the world. And we've been rated to have the greatest higher education system in the world by Universitas 21. The dollar has been a stable world currency that has provided investors with a stable place to put their money, which has proved very fruitful for countries around Eurasia. The United States protects shipping routes around the world, whether it be Somalia, or the South China Sea, or the Persian Gulf, where we get 28% of our oil supply. The United States has stopped the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We signed agreements with Russia, China, all these different countries. We intervene where there might be incidents of chemical weapons being developed or nuclear weapons being developed. And it's not always right. Sometimes we're wrong. But I think we've done a lot of good. We donate $13 billion a year in foreign aid to alleviate global problems such as poverty and disease, hunger, and we've done a lot of good. I can't prove it, and neither can my opponent, but that's just a natural way of things. You've got to draw your own conclusions.
You say that we donate the most. We do donate the most, but we don't donate the most percentage-wise. We only donate about like 0.1% of our total income as a country.
I agree. But our GDP is 23% of the world's GDP, so it's a pretty substantial amount.
Yeah, but you'd figure that we'd do more if we're spreading enough goodness. Yeah.
And I mean, like I said earlier, Americans are the most generous people in the world. That's been verified by third parties. Even when the government doesn't contribute, American citizens do. And that's just part of who we are as a nation.
All right, thank you, both of you, for the debate. We will try to do this next week if we can schedule 2 more people. Drewski, you want to say anything?
Yeah, for anybody who's watching, just try to give feedback. You know, if it was if there's anything you would change, because we're trying to make this as best of a show we can, and recommend any topics that you want in the poll that we have. And and just thank you to the 2 people who came on today. You guys both made excellent points, and that's all I really have to say about that.
I really enjoyed this show. You want to say something?
I was wondering, are we having closing points, or is it just ending abruptly?
I think you guys kind of informally closed.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm thinking of putting a formal closing statement sometime in the future, because I feel like that'll be better.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.